Welcome, everyone. This is so exciting. Dan and I are really excited to share with you our season announcement. And right now we have um, super exciting. I'm excited. I love the idea. Welcome to the Empire, everyone. Um, Season 2026 is the season of Empire, and that is where we're going to explore what happens if what it means to let slip the dogs of war and what happens when we reflect on our salad days amidst chaotic times. For those of you who have signed up to receive our emails, you might have already seen something like that. And so, just within that is a little hint of what we've got going on. The first show that we're doing, which is our Shakespeare on tour, is Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar. And our next show, which is Free Shakespeare in the Park, is Antony and Cleopatra, which, if you all know your history, they go one from the other. They're approximately in real life about 13 years apart. And we're excited to explore the continuation of these plays. Dan, I want to invite you to talk about. I know Dan has looked up some stuff and wants to share some things about. We're going to first talk about Julius Caesar.
Well, thank you, Carla. Thank you. I think the first thing that we wanted to share with you is first, this is a very interesting, and we hope both a provocative, a challenging, and an elucidating season for us, and one that has enormous resonance with our country's present challenges. This is looking at Rome through Shakespeare's eyes, through Elizabethan eyes, and also, in fact, incorporating the eyes of many ancient historians and writers. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, about what some of Shakespeare's sources and what some of the ideas that Shakespeare was working with were. But from our point of view, our thinking was, and this is, and for this, I give enormous credit to Carla Pantoja and to our directors and our staff, which is that this is the first time we've really done a season where we approached it from the outset as being an integrated exercise, and one where the plays relate to each other, and one where we think the juxtaposition of the plays, both from the touring company and Julius Caesar and from the Shakespeare in the Park play of Antony and Cleopatra, really have a lot to say to us. And we think that our directors are engaged already in some very interesting takes and very interesting locales. I will say nothing more because I don't want to step on any of the really terrific surprises that are going to come in this season. Suffice to say, you probably won't guess. There won't be anybody walking around in togas. Let me put it that way. And this is going to be a season which we hope will be one which will be both deeply and both emotionally, intellectually, and politically relevant, and one that will elucidate some of Shakespeare's greatest artistry and some of his most interesting thinking. Um, the plays that Carla and her team have chosen, there are five plays in the Shakespeare canon that touch on Rome. Two of them are really, they touch on it in passing, and it's not central to them. Those are, of course, Titus Andronicus, his early gory play written much under the influence of Marlowe's Tamerlane, and a huge popular play, but not a particularly good play. People liked it because it really was grand guignol, gory all through. Um, and then he touches briefly on it at the end of his career in Cymbeline, where there are references to and a look at Roman Britain. But the core of Shakespeare's engagement with Rome was much deeper and much more interesting and much more sequential. And that comes with Coriolanus, which is his look at Republican Rome and the collision between the political norms and the military norms and the expectations of individual conduct and individual virtue that were embedded in Rome. And I've often thought, although I can't substantiate this, but I've often thought that Coriolanus, I think what may have been on Shakespeare's mind when he was thinking about Coriolanus was Aristotle's very famous observation that a man without a city is either a beast or a god. And I think in many respects, that's what Shakespeare had in mind when he was thinking about Coriolanus and about the, the arc of Coriolanus's political trajectory and his ultimate withdrawal from Rome and from Rome's interests. But that's the first of it, and it's a play that's entirely focused on Republican Rome. And then we have Julius Caesar, which we are putting on, which is the axial moment. It is the central moment in Roman history in which Rome transitions from a republic, albeit one dominated by an enormously powerful leader and senator in Julius Caesar, to an empire. And then in Antony and Cleopatra, Shakespeare takes up the question of what does empire really mean, and of the collision in many respects between the worldviews, the values, the opportunities, the political and personal interests of Egypt, now a part of the Roman Empire, but utterly distinct in its history, culture, and mores on the one hand, and Rome on the other. And, it's when we look back at this, these are actually quite deep explorations on Shakespeare's part, and they are what is surprising in some ways when we look at these plays with a modern eye is how well informed they actually were about Roman history and about Roman politics. It's, the Renaissance in general, it's in some ways its greatest intellectual achievement across all of Europe was its rediscovery and reincorporation of surviving ancient texts of ancient authors. And, in these remote monasteries where some of these texts were found and preserved against all odds, and then the extraordinary ability of Renaissance Europe, both in the Catholic portions of the continent and in the Reformation portions of the continent, Switzerland, and to some degree parts of the Netherlands, and of course Britain, or England, to be able to incorporate these ancient writers whose ideas were so different from the then prevailing and mandatory Christian doctrines. It's an extraordinary intellectual achievement. And and this comes back to Shakespeare and to Marlowe and to Greene and Lilly and Kidd and Beaumont and Fletcher and Johnson, because in their schools, in their pre-secondary schools and in their secondary schools, they were the great beneficiaries of the huge wave of English reform led by Cromwell and Cranmer and Wolsey, in terms of English education. And the curricula in those schools, it wasn't, we wouldn't look at it as being complete because there was certainly absolutely no STEM in it whatsoever. But the curriculum in those schools, actually included Ovid, Virgil, Cicero, Plautus, Erasmus, Terence, Plautus, Suetonius, and it's and the histories of Rome that we got from those authors are really migrate directly into Shakespeare's plays. And then Suetonius, who in some ways is really one of the arch sources of these plays, um, is then amplified by the extraordinary work of Sir Thomas North in 1579 when he translated Plutarch and Plutarch's parallel lives, his great study of parallel Roman and Greek lives, which was written in Greek because Plutarch, although he was a Roman citizen and lived much of his life in Rome, wrote exclusively and was originally educated in Athens and wrote in Greek. And Plutarch was translated originally into French, and then the French translation of Plutarch from the 1540s was then translated by Sir William North in 1579 into English. And many of the scenes and much of the action in these plays actually comes from a combination of Suetonius and Plutarch. And in some instances, the Shakespeare quotes directly from the Sir William North's translation of Plutarch into English, which was obviously, literally, we can say with certainty that that book was sitting on Shakespeare's little bookshelf in his garret apartment in London when he was writing these three plays. And this tension between the Republican virtues in some respects and the Republican burdens that are presented in Coriolanus. And the burdens are huge. You have Volumnia, Coriolanus's mother, saying at one point in the play that if I had 11 sons and all had died in service of the state, my life would be complete and enriched. So you're talking about a very austere, the idea that if you got crosswise, the solution was suicide that afternoon. This is a very austere concept of the state's claim on personal virtue and personal action for the aristocracy. Of course, the plebeians are different. Although it's an interesting part of Coriolanus that the plebeians have an important speaking role in that play, and their views are clearly important in the formation of political thought in the republic that Shakespeare depicts. And then you move ahead to this axial moment when Rome transitions. Of course, it's only the great man theory of history that allows us to say that Caesar's rise and his assassination was the genuine transition between republic and empire. In fact, looking back, there are many, many other important evolutions, probably the most important of which was the extension of the terms of prefects and provincial military commanders, which under the Republican organization, they were limited to 1 year and they could not be extended, which is part of the reason why Caesar comes down and crosses the Rubicon. But as part of this transition to empire, it was essential that these posts become multi-year, sometimes of very long duration, which winds up creating these external sources of power and authority, which were necessary to manage the empire, but which were entirely antithetical to the original constraints embedded in Roman Republican polity to ensure that no individual, however powerful in any given year, would be able to translate that into permanent authority and permanent power. But nonetheless, the assassination of Caesar is clearly one of those axial moments. And then in Antony, we have this extraordinary collision between,
Wait,
with,
no spoilers, Dan.
oh,
Let's go.
okay, okay,
Let's
well,
wait.
yeah, okay,
Let's
fair
talk
enough, yeah,
about Julius Caesar.
huge, let's just say there's an enormous collision in Antony and Cleopatra between Rome and Egypt, and they're both part of the Roman Empire, and they are so different in all of their ideas, their histories, their cultures, their mores, their thoughts about what's important and what's not. And you have this amazing, this is, in many respects, it's Cleopatra's play. I mean, Cleopatra is just one of the most extraordinary female characters Shakespeare ever wrote. And the idea of, when you look at her and you see her as this play opens and evolves, you say, you think to yourself, how could this person possibly fit into the Roman Empire? It's like
Mm,
inconceivable. So anyway, so anyway,
we'll get into
so
that. We
all right.
promise.
So anyway,
Let's talk
so
Julius Caesar. Let's
all
talk
right.
about the tour. Let's talk about how these things are getting about, just so we don't like, we keep you all excited and interested. So for those of you who don't know, I will fill you in on how we choose our season, which is different than a lot of other theater companies do. Our Shakespeare on Tour mostly goes to schools. We also go to community centers, libraries, senior centers, um, and we in under Rebecca Ennals as the previous artistic director, we have asked schools what they need, what they want. And we want to make sure that we're like, how do we serve our community? And things that we've heard often is that it's really helpful for them when they're teaching the curriculum of Shakespeare to have students see it. I know it's incredible to think like, oh, wouldn't it be better if people actually saw Shakespeare versus just read it? I know Dan and I have talked about like that it always trips him up when I talk about it as a script versus the text
I
because
love
for
it. I
me,
love it. I love it when you say that, Carla. It brings life to these things in such an immediate way. It's terrific.
absolutely. And if you've been a student in the Bay Area and probably beyond, I was born and raised here, so I absolutely remember reading Julius Caesar my junior year. That was on the curriculum. And so Julius Caesar is part of the curriculum that we bring. Last year we had Romeo and Juliet, which is another one that is in the curriculum and part of rotation for schools to have. So Julius Caesar was one. We're bringing back our director, April Ballesteros, who was assistant director last year for Romeo and Juliet. So April Ballesteros is directing Julius Caesar, and the tour, just so you all know, is 45 minutes long. Five actors, 45 minutes long. That's it. It all fits within one period, one class period of 55 minutes. And that starts with an introduction with the show and time for Q&A from the audience members. Many have never seen a play before. Many have never seen a Shakespeare play before. Some have, but we are going out there and we tour all over the Bay Area and beyond. Five actors in a van. They put it up, set up the set, perform on the set, and take it down on the road. I know I've said this a lot, but that is how I started performing with SF Shakes. So the tour and Julius Caesar was the show I did with SF Shakes when I first performed with SF Shakes was on the tour performing five actors in a van. I had a great time. We performed all over. It's hard work, but it's so rewarding to be a part of multiple communities and bringing this play to folks. And so when they get a chance to see it after reading, um, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears, when they actually can experience it live, that is when it's really exciting because they understand how the words become alive and why we're still doing Shakespeare to this day. That's why it's so exciting. Um, so that's Julius Caesar. I do want to say April is setting this play around the Great War, which is World War One, where where we also have experienced or seen in history where the assassination of a political figure puts the entire countryside at civil war and war amongst different different factors and how folks then start to break apart. So excited for this, y'all. Um, I could talk more, but we have one more show to talk about. I'll let Dan talk more about Antony and Cleopatra. But before I hand it back over to Dan, I do want to say, very excited about how Antony and Cleopatra came about. In choosing the season, we flipped the script, so to speak. Instead of saying, this is the play, directors, can you fit into this play? No, we said, directors, what play do you want to direct with us? We chose the people first, and something that Katia Rivera, who's coming back after assistant directing Two Gentlemen of Verona this last year, so excited. But Katia has assistant directed and directed the tour. She directed this year's Romeo and Juliet Shakespeare on Tour performance. Um, so she is coming back again next year to direct Antony and Cleopatra, something that she's really interested in, and I loved her vision. I'll tell you more about it later, but that's how that came about. And all the planets aligned that we have Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra to become empire. I'll talk about empire a little later, but Dan, I want to hand it off to you to talk
Yes.
about Antony and Cleopatra.
Well, before I even get there, though, Carla, because one of the things you said, I just was so moved to comment on, which is the idea of our touring troupe climbing into the putting the scenery in the back of the van and climbing in the van and going around to these schools takes takes us, of course, right back to each of the Elizabethan theater companies. And all of them traveled from time to time. They traveled by ox cart rather than by van, but and they needed, and in fact, the reason why they needed licenses from their aristocratic patrons was because of a legitimate fear that a traveling company might be subject to criminal penalties under the Elizabethan vagabondage laws, which were intended to enforce social cohesion parish by parish. And in order to travel and perform, you had to have a license from an aristocratic patron. All of the companies did, and both in plague years in London and from time to time otherwise, they literally would do exactly what we do. They'd put themselves on the back of an ox cart, travel around, and go to places which had not seen a Shakespeare or any other plays other than the occasional medieval mystery play, and perform. So this is a wonderful ancient tradition, and it's an immediate bridge between what we're doing here in the San Francisco Bay Area and what our amazing predecessors in artistic interest did 425, 430 years ago in England. So I just wanted to just say, there's such a wonderful resonance when I hear the descriptions of our kids climbing into the vans with their scenery. It's, I see the ox carts wending their way north from London 430 years ago, in my mind's eye, exactly the same thing. So Antony and Cleopatra is this. It's one of Shakespeare's great tragedies. This is really a great play. This is not a second tier play or a play of antiquarian interest. This really deserves to stand among the greatest tragedies that Shakespeare wrote. And the the interpolation throughout the play. I mean, the play is fascinating. It jumps, its scenes jump. When we've been doing some book readings of Antony and Cleopatra with some outside guides from a lot of different places. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful dramaturges. And this play jumps back and forth between Rome and Egypt and Rome and Egypt and Actium and sea battles. And it's an amazing kind of a play in that sense. It has a driving force, this enormous forward momentum in this play that Carla and Katya and I were talking about as we were doing some of these read throughs. It's just, it's a snowball. Once it starts, it's unstoppable as it moves forward. It's going to be extraordinarily exciting to see. And it's this, the thing about the play that grips me, in addition to its truly profound and tragic picture of greatness on all sides, gone awry in many ways, is this interpolation between the political, the military, and the personal. And there is this subtle interweaving in all of their lives about this. Emma Smith, who is one of the great Oxford of the younger generation of Shakespearean critics, Emma Smith has this wonderful comment about Antony and Cleopatra, which is truly deeply insightful. And in the UK, there is this magazine called Oh Hello, which is the equivalent of People magazine here. It's a sort of a magazine about celebrities and their doings with, pictures of, celebrity events and fancy parties and people on yachts and, on the ski slopes. It's that kind of thing. And Emma Smith's comment about Antony and Cleopatra is that it really almost comes straight out of the pages of Oh Hello magazine. These are self-conscious celebrities. And much of what they do and say and think is not even reflective of their own inner selves. It's about the way in which they are consciously positioning themselves to be perceived by the world. And this is a play about celebrity as much as anything else. And it's a fascinating insight into this play. And I think we're all going to see very interesting aspects of this as Katya brings this production forward this summer. But it is a great play. It's not just a good play. It's one of Shakespeare's great tragedies, and it is hard to do because it is both so wildly varied in its scene by scene context, but also because it's such a power, there's such a powerful driving energy moving it forward. Really, from the very first scene, you see this laid out. And I won't go farther because I don't want to steal any of Katya's or our actors' thunders, but it's the equivalent of the guards on the parapet at Elsinore in Hamlet. I mean, when you start, you can't stop. It's just going straight forward. But it is a play which is not performed enough, and it's a wonderful thing that we're taking on the challenge of one of Shakespeare's great plays and one of his hardest plays to really put up, because it's global in its scope. It's everything from sea warfare to the lovelorn to the anger and annoyance and between a couple deeply in love. It's fascinating. It's a great thing. So it is so deeply integrated into a season in which we really are trying to explore what empire means, both in the ancient world and in our own world. And so I think this is not just a really cool choice, but it's going to be a great thing. Now, Carla and I we haven't announced our schedule yet, but we have wonderful, wonderful guests who are coming to join us in our Let's Talk About series this year. Our old friend Will Tosh, who is head of research at Shakespeare's Globe in London, is
I'm not
coming
sure
back.
he'd like being called old, but a
Well,
dear
he's
friend,
very young.
maybe.
Well, I described him as young in one of these things, and he almost took umbrage at that. He feels himself completely grown up, but in his early 40s. Will is coming back. Our great friend Professor Roland Green from Stanford is coming back to talk to us as well. We are bringing the wonderful, wonderful Regis Professor of English Literature at Magdalen College, Oxford, Laurie Maguire, who is one of the important Shakespeareans in the UK, is coming to talk to us. And as a wonderful guest, we have Professor Ayanna Thompson from Arizona State, who is the head of their Renaissance and Humanities college there, and a former head of the American Shakespeare Association, is also coming to talk to us. So we've got a wonderful array of interesting thinkers and guests who are going to do what our guests always do, at least for me, which is to truly deepen and enlarge my own understanding of these plays. And so this is going to be a terrific season, both in performance and in our forthcoming discussions about it as well.
So I think what Dan's trying to say is watch this space. We've got things coming up. We've got so many exciting things happening that we have done, that we're going to do. Something I want to talk to you about is that for Empire, what we're exploring with Empire is based on kind of anecdotally, Sir John Glubb had proposed that empires have a cyclical lifespan about 250 years, which, that is easily disproved, y'all, easily disproved. But it's an interesting connection point. And if you've been anywhere on the webs, I'm sure you've seen memes and posts wondering, what other country is around the 250-year mark? And this is where but I do feel very much so that we're at a crossroads and we as a people have to make a decision about where we want to go and who we want to be and how we want to be known as to the world beyond our borders and how we show up in the world. And I find it's very intriguing to pull apart this idea of empire. Are we witnessing the rise or the fall of one? And what do we do? What can we do? And we can explore that as any good artist does through art, through theater, through gathering with each other. Because when we gather together, that is when great things can happen. We've seen things happen just from gathering people together and making change of where we want our world to go. Where Dan was talking about, I do want to share before that we had an earlier script workshop where we looked at the entire script, led by incredible Dr. Louis Douthat from Play On, but also from the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
It
And
was
it was
fabulous.
really wonderful. Antony and Cleopatra is probably one of the most filmic scripts I have read so far of Shakespeare's canon. As Dan was saying, there's really short scenes and it goes really quickly. And he's not lying when it's really Cleopatra's play. I know we'll talk to Katya later on this season, this coming season about the play, but something that she was wondering, like, do we call it Cleopatra with Anthony? Because uh, spoilers, he dies before she does, but the play continues. Oh my goodness. Something exciting to think about because we have Julius Caesar that is set during the Great War or World War One, and Antony and Cleopatra happens about 13 years after the fact. Antony and Cleopatra will be set in the late 20s. So the music that you heard inviting you in is of the genre, the time period, talking about the exciting culture and art that's happening in Egypt and how the rise of fascism that was the seeds were planted after World War One start taking root. And what happens when Dan has beautifully talked about how the personal with the public and the political come together in a very chaotic and messy way, and how choices are made and how things happen. And once you're on that roller coaster, it's your seatbelt is buckled and it's on its way
Yes.
with this play. Our free Shakespeare in the Park is free. We go out to multiple theaters. We bring the theater to the people in the parks. It is free. Bring your blanket, bring your family, um, and enjoy a 90-minute, that's right, it's a 90-minute play. So it's got to be cut down quite a bit with six actors and performing outdoors in the beautiful sunlight as Shakespeare's troupe has done. And we are so excited to bring both of these plays to our communities, and we're so excited for you to join us to explore empire and what it means to make choices along the way. I also want to say that we cannot do this without you. Some of the exciting things that we had the script workshop, we've got these incredible speakers. Oh my goodness, I can't even Dan just gave you a soupçon of what's coming down the road, but we couldn't do these incredible things and share these incredible programs with you without your support. So if you feel so inclined, please donate. Tomorrow is Giving Tuesday. Please donate to support San Francisco Shakespeare Festival and our season of Empire. And I'm going to open it up to questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and place them in the chat. When will you start casting? So I am already, I almost quoted a different Shakespeare play that I probably shouldn't, even though I'm only in the shop and not on a stage. But let's just say I am hip deep in pre-hire interviews with folks. We're casting first Shakespeare on Tour, which starts rehearsing in January. So it is a whirlwind of offers have already gone out for some folks in Shakespeare on Tour. And then I am interviewing folks for Free Shakespeare in the Park. We had a group general audition and with other theater companies, other Shakespeare theater companies earlier this fall. We had our callbacks, which is when we are calling people back to have them look at specific parts. And yeah, we'll be announcing cast soon enough. Maybe not by the end of the year, but soon enough. We'll see if we're lucky.
You know,
What
Carla,
else? What other questions?
Carla, one thing I wanted to just comment on, which I think is worth just discussing for a moment, which is um, one of the things about the work that we do, and part of the reason why Carla and Toby and our whole staff and our directors and I all believe in this work is because it is so remarkably interactive. Carla was talking about the way in which the touring company engages with kids and the way in which we design it so that the kids not only see this but also engage with us. But it is also true that the work that we do in the parks in the summertime and these productions are are profoundly acts of community as well as acts of making art. People are deeply engaged with what we do. It's the opposite of an audience sitting in Stygian darkness and then a brilliantly lit stage taking place behind a proscenium arch separated by a fourth wall. We don't work that way at all. And when I think back, for instance, to the Act Five of Two Gentlemen of Verona, we literally had audiences in every place we performed shouting instructions and guidance to our actors about what they should do in the troubling situations they were placed into in this. And that reaches back exactly to the way these plays were originally written to be presented in an open amphitheater, shared light, shared sound, the audience standing there a foot away from the actors on the stage, shouting, crying, weeping, angry, happy, sad, all of that. That's what we really bring. And it is not just an artistic experience, it's not just an educational or an intellectual experience. Carla is so right in describing this as an act of community in what we're doing, and I think both of these plays are going to lend themselves, you know, pretty much everybody. I would guess that pretty much everybody on this event suffered through reading through Julius Caesar in 10th grade in high school. And I would guess that, our kids are going to come away with a totally different experience of it from what our touring troupe does. And anybody who tried as a high school person, and probably very few of us did, I certainly didn't, to read through Antony and Cleopatra will find a very different experience coming to Sue Bierman Park or McLaren Park or Cupertino or Redwood City to see it this summer. It's going to be an experience in which the audience is really part of the engagement and really part of the play, and that's a magical thing. And I think it, Carla is, as our artistic director, is too modest to say this, but just as a lay board member, I can say this. This is really great art that's being made, and it's great art in part because of the way it actually reaches out to and engages and includes the audience in what's being done.
I want to say that we have a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to see if I can answer them as best. I hear you, Kirk. First of all, I want to say, like, yes, the language of Shakespeare. Um, this is just sharing a little bit about me. I did not come to Shakespeare really. I didn't see a play performed until I was an adult. However, I did read in third grade, I read the Scottish play and I fell in love with it. My dad got a copy of a huge bound. It was used by a college student because it was already marked up, and he handed it over, and I just remember poring over it. And so, yes, the poetry is beautiful in both of these scripts, both Julius Caesar and Antony and Cleopatra. There's some gorgeous, gorgeous language in there, and which goes to show, like, to Phil, this is not, neither one of these are a play on script. They are cut and adapted by the directors themselves to fit within the time period that we've got the boundary of the 55 minutes, the 45 minutes of a show for tour, and the 90 minutes for free shakes. So those are all boundaries that our directors are cutting scripts for. And so these are not play on scripts. Um, and in terms of like why set it, so it was not my decision to set these during these time periods. It was the directors talking amongst themselves between April and Katya and saying, let's set it this time period, um, which I think is brilliant. It doesn't have to be today. I think it's an interesting way to look at, we can really see the rise of fascism from World War One. And looking back historically, we can look at that. But also, Shakespeare's themes, to me anyway, are timeless. And they could be put in just about any time period. But what an interesting time period to put it in, from World War One to kind of the rise and heyday of art and culture that is reflected even in our own country at that time, at the Harlem Renaissance, and how that shapes and changes and morphs from people wanting to going from a world war to expansion of thought and creativity to then trying to crush that creativity. Um, yeah, why not? Why not set it during World War One and the late 20s? The directors are have already created a kind of rubric of who is doubling with what part for both shows, so they know how many actors they have, and there may be a lot of quick changes, y'all, a lot of quick changes, but not a full on quick change. That would be like that was rough on actors, but yes, um, yeah, come on, Kirk. Yeah, how often are you going to see we you show up and I will meet you. I will save you a blanket spot and a chair, and we'll have a good time. And in terms of like audience members being directors, no, but it was great and lovely to see how folks are reacting in real time to plays that were written hundreds of years ago and are still very relevant today. I know Dan and I have talked about it before with groups, from with our two gents and two ladies from Two Gentlemen of Verona, but I have never been so inspired or so excited to see we had two groups, two high school groups come in from
Mm.
north of Sacramento. And if you all want to do your map questing and think about from north of Sacramento, they drove and bused students down from there to San Francisco to see a show. Those high school students were so involved. I could see them throwing up their hands and going, "Oh no, don't do it." And that means they're invested in the art. They see it, they're connected to it, even though it was written hundreds of years ago, but they were totally in it. And I love that. Um,
Yeah.
any other questions? Anything else you want to add, Dan?
No, I think, I hope that Carla and I have been successful in sharing with all of you our excitement about what this season is going to bring. These are great plays. They're plays that are interesting at many, many levels. They speak to everything from the extraordinary gift of the persistence of ancient texts into the English Renaissance, the extraordinary intellectual versatility and depth of insight of well, we'll call them our script writers in deference to Carla's usage, and given what our directors are doing with this, I think they're really going to speak to all of us in an extraordinary way. And it's going to be fun. This is not just, this is, this is not just this is not a 2 hour sermon. This is going to be, this is going to be interesting, engaging, and fun to be present as these things evolve. And and we also believe that this is an active community and an active art making that is important in forming the way we think about our own politics and the way we act in connection with our own politics. And I will I will say that I continue to be profoundly optimistic. I see tectonic plate shifting in what I don't think I'm being inappropriate in suggesting is our direction in this country. And we're playing our small part in this in a terrific way. So I'm incredibly excited. I'm really glad you could join us today. And do, as Carla said, do stay tuned. Do tune to this channel because we're going to have some terrific guests in addition to doing what we always do, which is to bring our wonderful directors and a bunch of our wonderful actors on to be able to talk to you directly. And often those events come at a time when many of you have already actually seen some of these shows, and so it's just very exciting and interesting to talk directly to the creatives and to hear what their thinking is. So I'm just feel hugely privileged to be involved with Carla, with Toby and the whole staff, with the wonderful directors and actors. It's a gift in my life, and I think I hope that all of you come to share that sense of what this organization does and how important it really can be. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Carla for a few last words, and then we're going to let you go until we reconvene with our first exciting guests. And so stay tuned for that. Carla, over to
Which brings
you.
me, great. Thank you, Dan. Which brings me to in the chat, Neil, our technical director, has put in recordings of past Let's Talk About It or on our YouTube channel. You can also get to it from our website. Check it out. On our website will also be listed when they start getting scheduled. You will see how to sign up and for our future Let's Talk About It. Check out our website. Also, we will have public performances of Julius Caesar. They're not just for schools or community centers. So please keep an eye um, on our website to see when those public shows are happening, usually to a library near you. If you want to book a tour near you, if you want your library or your artistic center, art center that's near you, reach out. Check out our website. We are booking now and booking fast. and there will be a show on the Ides of March. And so looking forward to the season and exploring what it means to look at empire.
And as the year winds towards its close and we all focus on our annual charitable giving, send us money. We need
Well,
it. We need it to continue. We value your support in every way. And it is, we would not be here were it not for the support of our friends, supporters, and patrons. We respect that, we honor it, and we ask for your continued support as we go into a wonderful and exciting next year. So thank you all for joining us.
thank you for joining us. Thank you all.
Take care. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.